On the morning of her 7th birthday, a little girl named Emily received a German Shepherd puppy from her mother, a soldier about to deploy for the third and final time. Her mother knelt on the living room floor, placed the puppy in Emily's arms, and said 4 words that would echo for the next 7 years. "Hay will protect you." 2 months later, her mother was killed overseas. 3 months after that, a semi-truck destroyed their car on a Texas highway, and Emily Parker lost the use of her legs forever, and while she lay there, 7 years old, paralyzed, unable to move, strangers took her dog, injected him, pulled him from the wreck, drove away into the Texas heat, and for 6 years, nobody believed her. Not the police, not the investigators, not even her own father. But here is what no one knew. That dog, beaten, scarred, colored with electricity, and scheduled for death, refused to stop. In a fight ring outside Dallas, he stood between a helpless dog and the men who wanted to destroy it, and took every blow rather than step aside. They called him non-compliant. They signed his disposal order. But 4 days before they could carry it out, a latch failed on a transport truck, and he hit the ground running, 40 miles, on damaged legs, across Texas roads he had never seen, guided by nothing but the memory of a little girl's hands on his face. He found her on March 14, 2019, and everything her father had buried for 6 years came with him. What happened next didn't just change Emily's life. It brought down a criminal empire, sent men to prison on July 8, 2019, and proved something that courtrooms and lawyers never could, that loyalty is the most dangerous evidence of all. Stay until the end. You will not be ready for how this story finishes. Stay with us because this story will leave you speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The morning of Emily Parker's 7th birthday felt different from the start. The Texas sky was wide and cloudless, the kind of blue that makes a child feel like the world was made specifically for her, and the warm air carried the smell of cut grass, and her mother's perfume drifting through the open kitchen window. Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, still in her pajamas, watching her mother kneel in the doorway with both hands hidden behind her back, and a smile too wide to mean something ordinary was coming. Captain Sarah Parker had deployed twice before, and both times she had come back. But this time something in her eyes was different, steadier, quieter. The way a person looks when they have made a decision they cannot say out loud. Emily noticed it but didn't know the word for it yet. She would learn it soon enough. "Close your eyes," her mother said, and Emily obeyed without hesitation, pressing both palms over her face the way she always did, not trusting herself to peek. She heard scratching on the floor, a small weight of claws on hardwood, and then something warm and wet pressed against her chin. She opened her eyes and gasped. A German Shepherd puppy, barely 10 weeks old, sat in her lap with enormous amber eyes blinking up at her. His paws were too big for his body. His ears stood half up and half flopped over, as if they hadn't quite decided what shape they wanted to be. Emily's breath caught somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She wrapped both arms around him and buried her face in the soft fur of his neck, and he didn't squirm. He leaned in. She named him Buddy before her mother finished, saying he was hers to keep. Sarah knelt beside them both and placed one hand on Emily's back and one on the puppy's head, and for a long moment no one spoke. The house was so quiet that Emily could hear her own heartbeat. Then her mother said, "He's going to take care of you while I'm gone." Emily pulled back just far enough to look up at her. She wanted to ask her mother not to go. She wanted to say she didn't want a dog, she wanted her. But Buddy chose that exact second to press his paw against her chest, right over her heart, and the words dissolved. 3 weeks later, Sarah Parker boarded a transport plane. 2 months after that, the notification officer came to the front door, and Emily's father opened it, and the world changed shape permanently. There was no dramatic moment. No slow motion grief. There was only a Tuesday afternoon that became the dividing line between everything before and everything after. That evening, Emily sat in the corner of her mother's closet with Buddy curled across her legs, her face pressed into the sleeve of an unwashed jacket that still held traces of Sarah's perfume. She didn't cry. She was too young to know how to do grief properly and too old to pretend it wasn't happening. Buddy didn't move for hours. He simply stayed, his warm weight anchoring her to the floor, his breathing slow and even, as if his job had already begun. From that night forward, Emily stopped seeing Buddy as a pet. He was the last warm, living thing her mother had chosen for her. He was the last promise Sarah Parker ever kept. The summer afternoon was unremarkable right up until it wasn't. Emily sat in the back seat of her father's SUV with Buddy's heavy head resting across her thighs. One of his ears flicked back as she traced lazy circles into his fur. The radio was low. Her father Michael drove with one hand loose on the wheel, his eyes tired behind his sunglasses. They had been to the grocery store. There was nothing significant about the day. That is the thing about the moments that split a life in two. They never announce themselves. 1 second the highway was a flat gray ribbon stretching between Texas scrubland and summer heat, and the next second a sound came that Emily would hear in her sleep for years. A horn. Not a warning blare, a long, sustained, mechanical scream that didn't stop. Her father's head snapped left, his foot hit the brake, and then the world folded. The semi-truck hit the driver's side with the kind of force that doesn't allow for reaction or thought, only sensation, a white wall of sound, the seat belt locking hard across Emily's chest, the window beside her exploding inward in a shower of glass, and then Buddy, somehow already moving, twisting his body between her and the collapsing door as the roof of the SUV buckled and the metal walls closed in around them. The impact left her ears ringing so completely that the next 30 seconds passed in total silence. She couldn't feel her legs. She registered that fact distantly, the way you notice something wrong in a dream before you fully understand you are asleep. Smoke threaded through the cracks. A smell, sharp, chemical, wrong, told her something under the hood was already burning. Her father was slumped forward, conscious but pinned, making sounds she didn't recognize. Buddy had gone still on top of her. She could feel his breathing shallow and fast, his ribs pressing and releasing against her stomach. The smoke thickened. She tried to move her feet. Nothing happened. Then the van appeared. Through the ruined frame of the side window, half buried in crumpled glass and twisted steel, Emily saw it white, no markings, stopping precisely at an angle behind the wreck as if it had been following them. 2 men climbed out. They moved fast, too fast, the practiced speed of people who had done something like this before. One went to her father's door. The other forced open the crumpled rear panel with a pry bar he already had in his hand. Buddy raised his head and growled, low and wet, trying to push himself upright on legs that wouldn't hold him. Emily tried to scream. Her throat produced nothing. The man leaned in without hesitation. He had something in his hand, a syringe, small and silver, and he pressed it to the side of Buddy's neck with clinical efficiency. Buddy's growl cut off. His body went slack across her lap. The man pulled him out through the broken door, and the other man took his legs, and they moved back toward the van with Buddy hanging between them like something already discarded. Emily watched every second of it. She could not move. She could not speak. The van's rear doors closed. The engine turned over. By the time the first ambulance siren reached the highway, the white van had already cleared the overpass and vanished into the flat Texas distance. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that Emily's spinal cord had sustained damage at the L1 vertebra. She would not walk. Not today. Not next week. Possibly not ever. Her father was treated for a broken collarbone and a concussion. When Emily told the first officer who came to her bedside about the van and the men and the syringe, the officer wrote it down and nodded slowly and asked her if she might have been confused by the trauma. When she told her father, he went very still in a way that wasn't shock. It was something else. Something closer to recognition. She was 7 years old, and she didn't have the word for it yet, but she filed it away behind her eyes, in the same quiet place where she kept everything she couldn't afford to lose. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold in Cedar Grove, the kind of Texas winter that never fully commits to the season but manages to be cheerless anyway. Emily sat in her new wheelchair near the living room window, a blanket across her lap, watching her father arrange presents under the tree with the careful movements of a man performing a task he needed to believe in. There were too many gifts. She noticed that immediately. Too many boxes, too much effort, the way adults sometimes try to purchase their way past something that cannot be bought. Michael Parker had been like that since the hospital. Too attentive in the wrong moments. Too quiet in the right ones. He hovered near her, handed her things before she asked, apologized for distances that weren't his fault. Emily accepted all of it without comment, because she was 7 and she had no framework for what she was sensing, only the persistent, low-frequency feeling that her father knew something he was not telling her. She waited until the gifts were open and her aunt had gone to the kitchen, and then she asked him about the van. She kept her voice even, the way she had rehearsed it in her head a dozen times. She described the white vehicle, the 2 men, the syringe, the way Buddy had gone limp. She watched her father's face as she spoke. Something happened there, a tightening around his eyes, a brief stillness in his jaw, gone almost before it appeared, and then he shook his head and sat beside her and said, gently but firmly, that she had been through a terrible thing, that trauma plays tricks, that the human brain protects itself by building stories around pain. He said it, in the measured voice of someone who has thought carefully about what they would say if this moment came. Emily looked at him for a long time without speaking. He held her gaze and didn't look away, which is exactly what a person does when they need you to believe them. She said, "Okay," because she was 7 and he was her father, and the alternative, that he was lying, was a door she did not yet have the strength to open. But she didn't believe him. She had seen what she had seen, and somewhere in the back of her mind, behind every ordinary day that followed, behind every physical therapy session and every new medication and every careful Christmas morning after that, the memory of the white van sat perfectly still and perfectly intact, waiting. 6 years is a long time to carry something. Emily was 13 now, tall for her wheelchair, with her mother's dark eyes and the quiet, watchful expression of someone who has learned to read rooms carefully. She had graduated from the heaviest grief and the worst of the pain, and had built a life inside her new normal, school, therapy, a small circle of friends who knew better than to say she was inspiring. She was not inspiring. She was just continuing. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon in March when she turned her chair down Maple Street on the way back from her tutor's house, the spring air carrying the particular smell of Texas before a rainstorm. She wasn't looking for anything. She was thinking about a history assignment. Then the dog came out from behind the storm drain at the edge of the sidewalk, and her whole nervous system stopped. He was thin. That was the first thing. Dangerously, visibly thin, ribs pressing against dull fur, moving with the stiff deliberateness of a body that had been hurt in ways that hadn't fully healed. He was a German shepherd, or had been once, before whatever had been done to him. His coat was patchy and scarred. He moved in a low, angled drag, one rear leg favoring the ground. Emily's hands went still on her wheels. She told herself it was just a stray. There were strays in Cedar Grove. It meant nothing. And then the dog lifted his head and looked at her. The scar was on his left ear. A crescent-shaped mark, pale against the darker fur, exactly the shape of a piece of broken glass that had nicked him on the night Emily's mother first presented him, when the gift box had torn unexpectedly and caught his ear as he bounded out. Emily had pressed a small cloth to that cut herself. She had held it there for 10 minutes while he licked her face. She knew that scar. She had made that scar. Her breath left her body. The dog dragged himself forward, closing the distance between them with the focused, agonized effort of something that had been trying to get somewhere for a very long time. He reached her chair and pressed his head against her knee, and she put both hands on either side of his face and said his name out loud for the first time in 6 years. He made a sound. Not a bark, not a whimper. Something lower and more broken. The sound of a creature that has been waiting past the point where waiting should have been possible. She called her veterinarian while sitting in the street with both hands still framing his face. Within 20 minutes, the scanner confirmed the microchip that had been implanted when he was 10 weeks old. It confirmed his identity. It confirmed something else too. The registration transfer on his chip had been filed 14 days after the accident, under a shell corporate name Emily had never heard. The authorized contact signature on the transfer form belonged to Michael Parker. Her father's signature. Her hands didn't shake when the vet showed her the printout. They went very still instead, The same stillness she had felt in the car the moment before impact, the moment before everything changed. She looked at Buddy's neck and saw the marks the shock collar had left. She looked at the surgical scars along his flank, thin and deliberate, the kind that don't come from accidents. She looked at his eyes, amber, unchanged, locked on her face with a recognition that 6 years and whatever had been done to him had not erased. She had been right. She had always been right, and her father had known. Dr. Renee Calloway had been a veterinarian for 22 years and had seen most things. She had not seen the particular expression on Emily Parker's face when she laid the registration transfer documents on the examination table beside Buddy's sedated form and asked the girl to look at the signature. Emily looked. She looked for a long time. Then she said, "That's his handwriting," with the flat certainty of someone identifying a body they were already bracing to find. The next several hours unfolded in the quiet, precise way that terrible things sometimes do when the person experiencing them has no more shock left to spend. Dockard Calloway had already flagged the microchip irregularities to a veterinary licensing board contact, and that contact had cross-referenced the shell company name on the transfer, Meridian Asset Holdings, against an insurance fraud investigation that had been active in Dallas County for 14 months. The connection came back within 3 hours. Meridian Asset Holdings was a subsidiary of a larger staged accident fraud network that operated across 4 Texas counties, engineering high-impact collisions to harvest insurance payouts and running side operations that included the acquisition and sale of trained working dogs to illegal fighting circuits. Buddy had been taken not randomly but precisely, because he was trained, because he was bonded, and because he was leverage. Michael Parker had consulted as a risk assessor for the parent company's legal arm 2 years before the accident. He had seen enough of their operations to be dangerous to them. The crash had not been random. The semi-truck that never braked had been arranged. Buddy had been taken to ensure Michael's permanent silence because a man who watched his daughter's dog dragged out of a burning wreck in front of her would understand the message without it being spoken. Emily sat on the plastic chair beside the examination table and held Buddy's paw while all of this was explained to her, and she listened with both hands wrapped around his and her eyes fixed on the wall above the door. When it was finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked one question, not about the fraud ring, not about the indictments or the timeline or the network. She asked, "Did he know I was in the car when they planned it?" No one had an answer for that. Not yet. The board contact called back before dusk. There had been movement on the insurance file 12 days before the crash. An internal memo flagged Michael Parker as a liability risk. The memo referenced a pending disclosure review and used the phrase, containment exposure. It did not mention Emily by name. It did not mention a child. It did not mention a passenger list at all. But the accident reconstruction report, pulled from county archives, documented 2 registered occupants in the vehicle at the time of impact. Michael Parker, Emily Parker. The semi-truck driver had a record that did not exist 6 months before the collision. His commercial license had been reinstated after a suspension that had been quietly sealed. Payment transfers from Meridian Asset Holdings to a logistics subcontractor had cleared 48 hours before the crash. The amounts matched the driver's outstanding debts within a margin of less than $200. Dr. Calloway did not soften any of it. Emily did not ask her to. Buddy's microchip had been scanned at 3 different facilities in the week following the accident. The timestamps mapped a route that ran south, then west, then stopped at a property outside county lines already under surveillance for animal trafficking. The property had been raided 2 months later. Several dogs had been recovered. Buddy had not been among them. His chip pinged again 9 days ago at a private clinic operating under temporary credentials. The registration transfer had been processed the same afternoon. Emily absorbed each fact the way someone memorizes instructions during an emergency briefing. She did not cry. She did not interrupt. She kept her hand on Buddy's paw even after the sedation monitor gave its steady, indifferent rhythm. Containment exposure, she repeated once, as if testing the weight of it. The licensing board contact confirmed that indictments were moving forward. 3 arrests had already been sealed pending coordinated warrants across counties. The fraud ring structure was layered. Shell companies fed holding companies. Holding companies funded subcontractors. Liability was distributed until no single signature appeared decisive, except one. Michael Parker's consulting reports had recommended shutting down specific claims pipelines tied to fabricated collisions. He had documented inconsistencies in repair invoices and medical billing clusters. He had written, in a margin note recovered from archived correspondence, "Pattern suggests deliberate orchestration." That note had been forwarded internally the week before the crash. Emily finally looked away from the wall and down at Buddy. Did he know? She asked again, quieter. The board contact could not confirm passenger awareness in the planning phase. The memo did not specify target conditions beyond event execution window. It did not state whether the vehicle was expected to carry one occupant or more. It did not clarify whether visibility of a secondary passenger altered the objective. What it did confirm was timing. The truck's route deviation occurred 8 minutes after Michael's vehicle left the highway rest stop. Surveillance footage from the rest stop showed Emily entering the passenger side with a drink in her hand. The truck driver's dispatch log showed a brief outgoing call 3 minutes later. No transcript existed for that call. Calloway folded the documents and placed them back into the envelope. The clinic was quiet except for the low hum of refrigeration units in the lab. Outside, traffic passed without interruption. Emily leaned forward until her forehead nearly touched the edge of the table. "He would have told them," she said, not as a question but as a statement built from years of knowing her father's habits. "If they asked, he would have told them I was there." No one contradicted her. Buddy's sedation began to lighten. His paw shifted in her grip. His breathing changed first, then his ears twitched in small, involuntary adjustments. The monitor maintained its steady pattern. Indictments would come. Arrests would follow. The network would fracture under subpoenas and financial audits. Insurance records would be reopened. Depositions would be scheduled. Names would be attached to signatures. But in that room, none of it answered the only question that mattered to her: whether the men who arranged the collision knew a 14-year-old girl was in the passenger seat when they decided to send a truck through an intersection without braking. No one had an answer for that, not yet. The footage arrived in Emily's email as an attachment from the Dallas County Prosecutor's Office, accompanied by a note explaining that she was being included in the evidence review as an identified victim and that the contents were disturbing. Emily opened it alone. She had specifically asked her aunt to leave the room, not because she was afraid of being upset, but because she was afraid of being seen while she watched. The video was grainy, shot on an internal security camera that had been seized from a facility outside Terrell. The timestamp read 8 months after Buddy had been taken. The lighting was poor and the angle was wide, but the identifications were clear enough. In the lower corner of the frame, a German Shepherd with a crescent scar on his left ear was brought into a pit area and positioned across from a smaller dog, younger, visibly terrified, pressed against the wall of the enclosure with its tail tucked and its head down. The handlers stood back. The signal was given. Buddy didn't move toward the smaller dog. He moved between it and the handler. He positioned his body as a barrier, his weight forward, his hackles up. Not in aggression, but in the specific stance of a dog who had decided that something was not going to happen on his watch. He was hit for it. Emily watched that part with her jaw locked and her hands flat on the desk. He was labeled non-compliant in the written log that had been recovered alongside the footage. That word appeared 3 more times across subsequent entries. Non-compliant, as if the refusal to destroy something smaller than himself was a defect. The log detailed corrective measures: reduced food allocation, isolation intervals, escalated handling protocols. Each notation was clinical structured, timestamp. There was no description of the smaller dog after the session ended. There was no comment on injuries. There was only performance assessment. Buddy's file number appeared on 3 separate transport manifests over the following weeks. Each entry marked him as unstable for circuit use. Each recommended reevaluation. Each closed without resolution. The final entry in the log carried a disposal order, standard language cold as an invoice. What the log did not record, because no one had been watching that particular camera at that particular moment, was what happened during a transport transfer 4 days before the disposal was scheduled. A rear latch on the transport vehicle failed. The door swung open on a county road 12 miles outside the city. Buddy landed hard, rolled, came up running, and did not stop. The driver reported the malfunction 36 minutes later. By then the road was empty. A search perimeter was established and closed within 6 hours. The report classified him as lost asset. No extended retrieval operation was authorized. Investigators had reconstructed his route from sightings reported along a 40-mile corridor. A gas station clerk noted a limping shepherd moving along a drainage ditch at dusk. A postal carrier logged a large dog crossing a rural intersection at sunrise. A highway maintenance worker reported a shepherd resting beneath an overpass before continuing southwest. Always southwest, toward Cedar Grove, toward a house on Maple Street, toward a girl in a wheelchair who had pressed a cloth to his ear when he was 10 weeks old. He had no map. He had no landmarks he had seen in 6 years. He had scent memory and the particular loyalty of a creature that had only ever belonged to one person. Traffic cameras confirmed a shepherd crossing into Cedar Grove's outer boundary 3 days after the escape. A homeowner's doorbell camera captured a brief image of him moving past a hedge 2 streets from Maple Street. The timestamp on that clip was 5 hours before Dr. Calloway's clinic scanned his microchip. He had covered nearly 40 miles with a partially healed rib fracture and untreated lacerations documented later in the medical report. His paws showed wear consistent with sustained travel over asphalt and gravel. Dehydration levels indicated limited access to water during the first 48 hours. He had continued anyway. Emily paused the video at the frame where he stood between the smaller dog and the handler. She studied the line of his body, the position of his head, the refusal in it. Then she closed the laptop. For the first time since the examination room, she cried. Not for the cruelty, though that was there too. She cried because she understood something that no court document would ever capture properly. He had never stopped trying to come back. Buddy's collapse happened without warning, the way infections do when they have been building long enough. He had been recovering at the Animal Medical Center under Dr. Calloway's supervision, slowly putting weight back on, slowly adjusting to sleeping somewhere safe. And then at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, his temperature spiked to 106, his breathing shifted, and the night tech called Emily's phone and told her to come quickly. She arrived in 18 minutes, still in the clothes she had slept in, her chair wheels hissing against the linoleum as she came through the automatic doors. Dr. Calloway was already in the back, her scrubs untucked, her face wearing the particular expression that medical professionals carry when they are working hard and are not yet sure it will be enough. The infection had reached his bloodstream, a delayed consequence of the surgical procedures he had been subjected to during his time in the network, wounds that had been closed quickly and cheaply without regard for what might fester inside them. His heart rate was unstable. They needed to operate within the hour. Emily was told to wait in the family consultation room, a beige space with plastic chairs and a table with old magazines, and she sat in it alone because her aunt hadn't made it yet, and her father was someone she was no longer calling. She sat with her hands in her lap and talked to her mother. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't need to. She said, "You gave him to me for a reason, and I am asking you not to take him back this way, not like this, not after everything." She said, "I know you can't promise me, but I am asking anyway." The surgery lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. At 6:10 in the morning, Calloway appeared in the doorway of the consultation room with her mask pulled down below her chin, and she looked at Emily and said, "Has stable." Just those 2 words, and then she leaned against the door frame for a moment as if her own legs needed a second. Emily didn't celebrate. She exhaled, long and slow and shaking, and then she thanked her mother in the same quiet internal way she had asked her. When she was finally allowed to sit beside him, Buddy was still sedated and small, looking under the surgical blanket, his breathing slow but steady and even. She put her hand on his and stayed until her aunt arrived at 7 and made her eat something. She didn't let go of him the entire time. The courtroom on the morning of July 8 held 43 people, including 2 federal prosecutors, 8 defendants, a row of journalists whose phones were silenced but whose attention was absolute, and Emily Parker. seated in the front row behind the prosecution table in a dark blue dress she had chosen carefully because her mother used to say that the way you present yourself in a room tells the room who it is dealing with. The state's case had been building for months: wire fraud, insurance fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, and a parallel filing on animal cruelty statutes that the lead prosecutor had argued for personally against initial resistance from her supervisors. The evidence was substantial. Financial records, intercepted communications, the registration transfer documents, the facility footage. The defendant's attorneys had spent the morning arguing procedural objections with the quiet determination of people who know the facts are against them. Michael Parker was not at the defendant's table. He was in the third row, separated from Emily by 2 empty seats that felt like a much larger distance. He had cooperated with investigators in the final weeks before trial after his attorney advised him that the alternative was a primary indictment rather than a cooperation agreement. He had given testimony that corroborated 3 key elements of the prosecution's timeline. He had not spoken to Emily before doing so, and she had not asked him to. When the courtroom footage was played, the segment showing Buddy placing himself between the smaller dog and the handler, the room went quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of people being polite or bored or waiting for the next thing. The quiet of people confronted with something that made the case feel suddenly human in a way that legal language and financial charts had not. The lead prosecutor paused the clip on a single frame, Buddy's body angled forward, the smaller dog visible behind him, the handler's arm raised, and let it sit on the screen for 10 seconds before saying anything. Several of the jurors had changed expressions by the time she spoke again. Sentencing took place 4 weeks later. The primary defendants received the maximum available terms. The judge's remarks included a direct reference to the footage and to the evidence of Buddy's treatment as reflective of the network's broader pattern of coercive harm. Emily gave a victim impact statement of 4 minutes and 17 seconds that she had written and rewritten 11 times. She did not cry during it. She looked at the room and she spoke in a clear, measured voice. And when she was finished, she thanked her mother for teaching her what it meant to do the hard thing anyway. Michael Parker listened to every word from the third row. She did not look at him once. The program was called Partners in Recovery, and it operated out of a converted ranch property 40 minutes outside Cedar Grove, where rescue animals and human trauma survivors were paired in structured therapy sessions. Emily had enrolled Buddy 3 weeks after his surgical clearance, partly because Dr. Calloway recommended it, and partly because she had noticed that Buddy still startled at sudden sounds in a way that had nothing to do with being alert and everything to do with having been conditioned to expect pain. The morning of September 9th was dry and bright, the kind of Texas September that pretends summer hasn't ended yet. They were working in the open field behind the main building, a large, flat space bordered by a wooden fence, and the session had been going well. Buddy was moving with more ease than he had in weeks, responding to Emily's signals, circling back to her chair between exercises in the comfortable, checking in a way that he had always done when he was small. Then a pickup truck backfired on the road beyond the fence. The sound cracked across the field like a single rifle shot. Buddy dropped instantly. Not to the ground, he dropped internally, folding in on himself, his head going low and his ears flattening, and his whole body contracting as if trying to become smaller than it was. A sound came out of him, high and thin and completely unlike anything she had heard from him since the reunion. Emily felt her own chest constrict. The familiar compression, the highway sounds, the folding metal, the smell of gasoline, her hands tightened on the wheels. For exactly 3 seconds she was back in the back seat of the SUV with the horn screaming and the window exploding inward. She knew what it was when it happened. She had done enough therapy to name it, and naming it was the thing that gave her the next step. She moved her chair to him without hesitation, without waiting for the therapist who was already crossing the field toward them. She positioned herself beside him and placed both hands on his back, flat and steady, and she said his name once quietly, and then kept talking in a low continuous voice, about nothing significant, about the fence and the sky and the color of the grass and the way the air smelled like dry cedar. The way he had once kept her company in her mother's closet without needing the words to mean anything, just needing the sound to exist. His breathing shifted. Slowly. Over the course of 4 or 5 minutes, his body began to unclench. His ears came up partway. He pressed himself against her wheel and turned to look at her face. The therapist reached them and started to speak. Emily shook her head slightly without turning around. Not yet. She stayed with him until his breathing was fully even, until his tail moved once, tentatively, close to the ground. Then she exhaled and dropped her forehead lightly to the top of his head. They had both been inside the same fear. She had brought them both back out. The therapist, watching from a few feet away, made a note in her file, not about the relapse, about what came after it. 7 years to the day from the morning Sarah Parker knelt in the doorway with both hands behind her back, and a smile too wide to mean something ordinary was coming. Emily Parker sat in her backyard in the May sunlight with a cup of coffee cooling beside her wheel, and a stack of unopened mail on the table that included, somewhere in the middle, a letter from the Texas Attorney General's office confirming the nonprofit status approval for an organization she had spent 14 months building. She had named it Sarah's Shield. Its stated mission was the legal support and public exposure of staged accident fraud networks, specifically those operating in conjunction with illegal animal exploitation operations. She had testified before 2 legislative committees. She had been quoted in 3 investigative pieces. She had received emails from 21 people across 7 states who had recognized their own stories inside hers. Buddy lay across the top of her feet in the sun, heavier now, his coat fully restored, the scars still visible but no longer raw. He was certified. It had taken 8 months of formal work, temperament evaluations, training, documentation, therapy sessions observed and assessed, but he had passed every component, and the certification card was laminated and tucked inside the front pocket of Emily's chair bag where she could feel it when she put her hand in there. He made weekly visits to a pediatric ward at Cedar Grove General, and the nurses there had taken to saving him a specific biscuit from the staff break room and presenting it to him with ceremony. He accepted it with the dignified patience of a professional. Emily heard the back gate and looked up. Sheriff Dalton, retired now, but still the same measured posture, still the same careful eyes, came around the side of the house carrying a small wrapped box. He had not been asked to come. He came because he had been there when the pieces came together, and because some things deserved to be witnessed. He sat in the patio chair across from her and set the box on the table and looked at Buddy for a moment before speaking. "How's he doing?" he asked. Emily looked down at the dog across her feet. He had lifted his head when the gate opened, assessed the situation, and lowered it again, his chin resting on her ankle. "He's doing what he always does," she said. "Staying close?" Dalton nodded slowly. He looked at the unopened mail and the cooling coffee and the laminated card in her bag, and something in his expression settled. "Your mother would have liked today?" he said. It was a simple thing to say, the kind of thing that could easily come out wrong, but it didn't. Emily picked up her coffee. "She planned it," she said. "She just got the timeline wrong." Buddy shifted his paw, pressing it more firmly against her foot, the way he had on the very first morning, in the living room in the May sunlight, when Sarah Parker was still alive and the world was still arranged correctly, and a 10-week-old dog with ears that couldn't decide what shape to be placed one oversized paw against a 7-year-old girl's chest, as if to say, "I have you, I will always have you." The thing he had been saying ever since, not in spite of everything, because of it. Buddy came back 40 miles on broken legs because he remembered one thing, who he belonged to. He had no map, no name, no address. Just a scent, just a memory. Just a promise made the morning a little girl pressed a cloth to his ear and said, without knowing what it meant yet, "I've got you." Emily spent 7 years being told she was wrong. About the van, about what she saw, about what she remembered, and in the end, the only one who never once asked her to doubt herself was a dog. So here is the question I want to leave you with tonight. And I genuinely want your answer in the comments below, because I think it says something important about all of us. Has there ever been someone in your life, a person or an animal, who believed in you when everyone else told you that you were imagining it? Tell me. because Emily's story started with one small act of loyalty that everyone dismissed as nothing. And I have a feeling yours might too.